This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I am your host, Dina Sabry Fivaz, and I'm a transition coach and founder of Agape Heart and Soul. In this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to experts, coaches, and thought leaders who share their passion for being a coach versus doing coaching, for coaching beyond tools. Our aim is to challenge ourselves as coaches to reconsider some of the prevailing thinking around what good coaching looks like and to inspire ourselves to dare and truly show up within the coaching relationship. Welcome to this final episode on our podcast series, Coaching Beyond Tools. I am here with Robin Shohet. Robin, delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you.
In this podcast series, Robin, we explored until now quite a lot of topics that I believe are close to your heart. So we spoke about the use of self with John Lee Rejoice. That was our first episode. We spoke about the use of intuition and inner wisdom with Maria Eilif Wood. We spoke about the spiritual function of coaching with Abudi Shabi. And we spoke about the role of love in leadership, but also in coaching with Helena Clayton. And I thought it might be a really nice way to bring this series to a close by exploring some of these elements with you from your own perspective and your experience, because I think you bring your own flavor to all of these. The first thing, though, I want to ask you is, what would you like our listeners to know about you? Maybe just a few words about your background, your experience. It's quite rich, so you can share whatever you feel is relevant.
I'm just trying to think on what level to answer your question. What would I like them to know? I have been supervising for close on 50 years. That doesn't necessarily make me a good supervisor because I could be doing the same thing 50 times, or so to speak. But I think over the years I have gathered some experience. But probably if I start with my first supervision, it was at a place called the Richmond Fellowship, which was a therapeutic community. There were 21 houses of this organization for people coming out of a psychiatric hospital or for people who were trying to recover from alcohol or drug abuse. And they comprised what was called the Richmond Fellowship. And I was at the training house with Peter Hawkins and my wife. She wasn't my wife then, Joan Wilmot. And we were the training house, and Peter's job as what used to be called the warden was to help to introduce a supervision policy along the whole organisation. And that was mid-1970s. So you can see we were pioneers in some ways in supervision. And we rolled it out with all the staff in the other Richmond Fellowship houses. And what can I say? That was 1970. I left in 1979 and I went freelance, teaching supervision, supervising, running training courses and so on. So that's the external. And I've done several books on supervision. But I was thinking you could read that up or somewhere, but what would I really like you to know? That I know less as I get older, sense of certainty, sense of I know what I'm doing, lessens rather than increases, which may surprise some people, but that's why I was saying 50 years doesn't necessarily make me better. It makes me more aware of what I don't know.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the 50 years of experience, and I hear what you're saying around we never stop to learn, and the more we know, the more we realize how little we know. And yet it just seems like such an incredible journey, 50 years in supervision. And I can imagine all the rich experiences you've had and the people you've met and how you've impacted them, how they've impacted you. That's why I did this. That's beautiful. To prepare for our conversation today, Robin, I've been reading and listening to some of your previous interviews and podcasts. And there was one thing you said in one of them that really stayed with me, and I wanted to ask you about it. And there was at some point you said, coaching has lost its way. I was wondering if you could maybe share what you mean with that, whether you still believe it. And I couldn't tell you in what interview you said that anymore, but it just really stuck with me. Coaching has lost its way.
I'm a bit shocked at the presumptuousness and arrogance of saying that. But I will, as I said it, I will explain it. I feel that even therapy, anything that this is really going to be difficult to get across, but anything that in some levels builds up the separate self is actually how I describe it is that coaching and therapy help you to find a good prison and to be comfortable in the prison, but neither of them helps you get out of the prison. So I see coaching as get your best results in the prison, and therapy will teach you how to manage yourself in the prison as well, and they overlap. But neither, and I've been a therapist for many years, but neither of them really focuses on what would getting out of the prison look like. The first thing is you have to know that you're in the prison. And what I feel that coaching and therapy might do, and I don't want to be presumptuous about this, is reinforce the idea of a separate identity, which has to be happier, rather than actually look at how a separate identity can never ultimately be, because it will always have fear.
I'm still trying to understand that idea of coaching and therapy keeping us in those prisons. Maybe help me understand, like, what kind of prisons would you say coaching and therapy are keeping us in or helping us manage?
Well, again, I feel a bit nervous even saying this, but the whole idea of a separate identity. If I believe I'm Robin, I'm going to be spending enormous amounts of energy protecting Robin, comparing Robin, making Robin feel better. Can you see that this Robin person, difficult to explain? I have a sense, reading all the scriptures, that this separate identity is an illusion, and some of my own experiences to go with that. And if you really believe that you're connected to everything, then at some level, you're not going to be spending all that energy protecting this separateness. And I often quote the Upanishads, that's the Indian scriptures, saying, where there is another, there is fear. As soon as I believe I'm separate and I make you other, and that other could potentially be dangerous to me, or I might want something from it and therefore manipulate or use it. And I'm really interested, is there a state where everything just is as it is and I'm not spending the energy advancing Robin? I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
It does. It does. Yeah.
And that's what the latest book, Supervision of Spiritual Practice, is really trying to say. Can we go beyond the usual confines of you bring a case or you bring something, an issue, and then we fix it temporarily until the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one? And is there a something that creates all the issues? So today it will be one issue, tomorrow it'll be another issue. And what is the something that creates the issues? And can we get down to that?
So what would that process look like, Robin? I'm trying to think. There's just something so confronting. And I love this image. And I remember you shared it in our very first conversation, this analogy between coaching therapy and the prison. I think it made me cry. I remember I started having tears just because it's something felt so true in how sometimes coaching feels and how I'm doing it or how I've been taught to do it. And I'm just sitting now with this wondering, so how can my coaching become a way out of that prison in practice? I can't grasp it yet. And I wonder if you have ideas, what could that look like?
I don't know whether coaching could get you out of the prison. I really don't know. But if you get out of the prison, it will affect your coaching practice.
If I as Dina, you mean?
Yes. If you found this state, the whole approach to coaching would be different. It would be like, let's say I've got a problem with my boss, just for argument's sake. And if I actually work on how to be more assertive or reactive or this or that or the other, then I'm still taking the issue with the problem with my boss as real and managing myself around it. Supposing the issue is that actually there is no issue with the boss, it's actually related to my perception, and that actually it's my perception that's faulty because I've othered this boss. So rather than focusing on the boss, I'd look at how I might have othered them, projected onto them, and not see them as, dear, language just embarrasses me to say, this human being who's doing their best, and that we're both connected at a very deep level, and the trying to go past appearances. And that's very easy to say, but very hard to do. And just to be very pragmatic, because actually I do believe that I can talk theory off the backside of a donkey, but actually we have a lovely exercise that I do want to share with your listeners, which is I ask people to share an issue, and then people listen through one of four lenses: fear, judgment, curiosity, or love. And when they listen through the lens of fear or judgment, people notice how tense they are, how they're not really listening, how they're judging, how they're condemning, how they're all sorts of things. And then when they move to curiosity or love, they sit forward, they see the person more clearly, they can wait. And what I'm trying to do is, rather than fix things, is ask people to change their lens. And when we join with all that is, if love is who we are, and I fundamentally believe that is true, then the only issue we have is how in this moment we are separating ourselves from love, which is just a bit of a reframe.
There's so much richness in what you say, Robin. It wholeheartedly resonates for me, this idea of, and I think that's what I'm hearing about love being at the center of the relationships, what you said, because when we truly love, that what I would call the agape kind of love, there is no othering because you and I, we are one. And so what I'm hearing is that whatever issues then come up, whether it's in a coaching, in a therapy, in a supervision session, if we can help ourselves as the coach in this case and the client see beyond the immediate topic and connect it back to that sense of we are all connected, we are part of a much something much bigger, and that love, something happens, something shifts that is much bigger than just the little nitty-gritty day-to-day difficulties, challenges we may be facing and focused on.
Yeah. And you know that somewhere. And when I speak to people, it's more like we know it all. We know all that. And for some reason, this mind that we have that just takes over, and then we become dominated by a fearful mind. And I've spoken several times on a wonderful book called My Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolte Taylor, who had a massive stroke on her left hemisphere. And she said she just lived from the right hemisphere and everything was fine. It was like an ease in her life. And she didn't know where she began and where she ended. It was like this thing called the body was much more fluid and connected to everything. And then she watched her left hemisphere come back and she realized that it had its uses, but it actually told stories about wanting to keep its identity. And she said it didn't tell the truth. It just made up versions of things that just made it look good. And she said, thank you very much for your offerings, but I don't actually need you. I've got this other place that I'm very happy in. Thank you very much. So she went into a place of non-separation. And I think what coaching and therapy can do, and I'm putting them both together, and because I've got more experience of being a therapist than a coach, is actually take the stories more at face value and then try to fix the story rather than trying to go to who is the one that's telling the story, who is the I telling this story today and another story tomorrow and another story next week, and this I that's manufacturing, this left hemisphered I that's manufacturing stories to keep itself in business.
I happened to be listening to a conference, a coaching conference this morning. The first speaker was talking about Nancy Klein's Time to Think and how, from her perspective, coaching is a space, or the purpose of coaching is to help the client have the space to think things fully. But in this world, the coach is not allowed to interrupt. So we're here with our presence and our attention. But the idea is to allow the client to then just think, even if it means rambling. And that in itself will help them find the solution or the resources. But I think what I'm hearing is that based on what you're saying, that actually would just have them go in a loop. If it's just this left brain hemisphere thinking, pure thinking, we're not getting to this deeper, the I behind the thinking. I think we would be missing something if that's all coaching would do. And this idea of interruptions, I don't remember, there was something, is an assault. I think she said interruption is an assault on thinking.
Oh my goodness.
But what I'm hearing in your talking is actually interruptions would be welcome because unless I interrupt the narrative somehow in some shape or form,
sure,
the client is just going in a circular internal place. I don't know if I make any sense.
Oh, you make perfect sense. I'm just a bit reluctant to say that Nancy Klein's work is very highly thought of, and I know people who really have benefited from it. So I'd be reluctant to say that. It's like everything has its shadow side. So I suppose Nancy Klein's shadow side would be people going round and round in circles. I suppose this whole idea of no separation can take us into la la land. Everything is fine as it is, and everything is meant to be. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
The ego, the mind, will use anything to keep itself in business. It will use Nancy Klein when it suits it. It will use non-duality when it suits it. I've just, my experience of my own self is how tricky I can be. Really, in some ways, I wouldn't trust me at all. I see more and more layers of self-deception. That's what I mean about being in the prison. The prison is self-deception.
The prison of self-perception, you said.
No, self.
Self-deception. Yes.
Yes. The prison is self-deception. And I see myself thinking that I want to get out, but I see how cleverly the mind will keep me believing something about myself, which is why I hesitated at the beginning when you said, what would you like them to know? And I could almost say, I do fly by the seat of my pants, but I could almost say that I'm a very dishonest person. And I mean it in a particular way. Like, I'm not going to go out and rob a bank, or I'm not a pathological liar or whatever. But the amount of self-deception that we engage in is staggering. And I'm no exception.
I guess it's the stories we tell ourselves.
Yes, to make ourselves look good, to make ourselves look right, to belong to a certain group whose approval we want, to sell ourselves.
I'm curious, Robin, you have this course in supervision. I think you call it supervision as a spiritual practice.
Yes.
So what we spoke about right now with the aspect of othering, the lenses of fear, judgment, as opposed to curiosity and love, is that what you mean with supervision becoming a spiritual practice? Or how should we understand this aspect of spiritual practice of supervision and possibly of coaching then?
I think it's about raising awareness. And what I like about supervision is it's soft space for reflection. In that way, it's like Nancy Klein. Then it's how we can disengage from our stories. And I think that any good, doesn't matter, coaching, supervision, therapy, it doesn't matter what we call it, that helps us with the disidentification is going to be useful. Because I think the more we identify with this separate self, the more I have to protect it, justify it, explain it, and so on.
So my super practical mind, Robin, can't help wonder, how can I support my clients? Or how do you go about supporting your supervision clients to disengage from those stories? How do you do that?
Quite a lot of my work is around making fear conscious. Like, what stops this love, this joining, has to at some level be some kind of fear. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. Yeah.
Fear is very sly. And I was just talking about this a couple of days ago. Fear is very sly. It doesn't come out as fear. It might come out as a judgment or a comparison or a very subtle withdrawal or boredom, but there'll be a fear there. So part of the work that I do is helping people to recognize their fear, and in the awareness of it, help to dissolve it. And in the moment when that fear has been dissolved, you get a sense of ease or relaxation, and that helps you to join with whatever, whoever. So actually, paradoxically, I run workshops on fear and love in supervision and spend most of the day looking at fear. And people go, well, we haven't looked at love. And I said, you don't need to. That's who you are. It's looking at the blocks to your love that I'm interested in. So I think that, and I did online events with Helena, and we did fear and love. And the first day I did fear, and the second day she did love. And what I was talking about is helping to remove the blocks, make it safe enough for people to say, I'm scared. And that has the effect of joining. We join together. You're scared, I'm scared. The content might be different. You're going to be scared of different things to me, but underneath, we are scared. And when we say that with each other, the sense of separation lessens. We join in our humanness.
I can see what you mean with fear. It's almost like you're opposing, so that the opposite of love is not hate, the opposite of love is fear. I think that's what I'm hearing. And by recognizing, exploring, acknowledging some of the fears that block love, that's when love can flourish. And I love this idea of how we are love. So we don't need to worry about what love looks, feels like. We just need to work on all the other stuff that's blocking us from being who we actually are.
Yeah, you've got it. Given that you get it so easily and so quickly, my question to you is, why aren't you doing this? Why do you need me?
I never thought of it this way, actually. I can relate to it easily because I do believe, like you, that we are love. In my own spiritual practice, I believe in a God and I believe that God is love. And because God created us in his image, that means to me that as he is love, we are love. But I think the piece I was missing is I was focused on how can I love more?
Ah,
And the piece you've given me now is that it's not about how can I love more, is how can I deal with all my fears and the blockage so that love can show. So that's a big aha for me right now.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Gosh. Oh, okay. Thank you. There's a Sufi saying, which I've written a chapter on fear and love in supervision. It starts with fear knocked at the door, love answered, and there was no one there. It's like once you bring fear to consciousness, then it's like it doesn't have the same power, but it has a lot of power when it's not made conscious. And it comes out as all sorts of distorted behavior. I do believe that if you tracked back that all anger you can see fear behind anger, for example. You can see fear behind grief, that sense of loss. If it keeps on, is like behind it might be the fear that I'll never get somebody else again that I love that much. Or I'm really interested in seeing what's behind the emotions and see if we can track it to some kind of fear by making the fear conscious. And I don't want to make fear bad. It's just make it conscious so it alerts us to where we might have been missing the connection with everything that is.
The image that came to my mind now as you're speaking, Robin, is this idea of when fear is in the dark, when it's hiding, it just festers, it grows, it's a great place for it to be. But as soon as you try and bring it to some light, regardless of how little, the tiniest of cracks, it shifts. It has to shift, doesn't it? Something changes. And eventually, as you said in the example, it just disappears. It's no longer there. I don't know, there's something about the darkness and the light and
Yeah.
bringing that in so that things shift and change.
So there's a teacher called Byron Katie. She was a 43-year-old housewife, violent alcoholic, when she was in a halfway house for people with eating disorders, and a cockroach went over her foot, and she suddenly realized that everything, this is what I mean about being out of the prison, everything, but everything that she believed was not true. And that is so mind-boggling that we just don't want to go there, because she went downstairs and somebody said, your husband's waiting for you. And she said, I have a husband. And well, what planet am I on? It was just like everything, all the coordinates that we comfort ourselves with had gone. But instead of going psychotic, she was awake and she just said, oh, this laughter just came through me. Everything, there was something looking through me and it loved everything as it was. And she went on to teach around the world with 4 questions and a turnaround. And one of the questions, the first question was, is it true? Which is a very good way to dismantle the stories. The boss is an ogre. Is that true? Yes, he does this or does that. Can you really know he's an ogre? And then she questions and gradually dismantles our belief systems. Anyway, she went to visit somebody who had cancer, a friend who had cancer. And as she was leaving, the friend said, Katie, I love you. And Katie said, not possible. Until you love your cancer, you can't love me. And the friend just laughed because she saw that how she was making something bad. And what we do is we divide the world into good and bad and right and wrong. And as soon as we do that, we make ourselves into little gods. I know what's best. I know what the world should look like. If everybody behaved like me, the world would be a better place. And so we sit and judge and jury on how the world should be. And what Katie saw is that it's just all made up. And that's what I mean about being out of the prison. You no longer start to believe your own, and like I talked about self-deception. you no longer start to believe your version of the world. It's just like your own story. And I think rather than make the story better, which is, I think, what therapy and coaching can do, you say, can we dismantle the story altogether? Which is a completely different way of looking at it.
And do I understand it right, Robin, that we dismantle the story, not to replace it with another story, but what do we do with it? If you help me understand that part.
I've only had glimpses of what happens. You just go, whoa, oh, yes, okay. And everybody gets those glimpses. Beautiful sunsets or rainbows or, we all get those glimpses. And in that moment, you're not going, I think that rainbow could have a little bit more purple in it, don't you? Can we improve it a little bit? Or looking at the night sky and saying, I'm not sure about the shapes of those stars. Do you know what I mean? We just, whoa. Do you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
we lose that critical faculty and we just let it be as it is and in awe. We are in awe. And I like the word awe, A-W-E.
Yes. That was actually the word that was in my head, Robin, just as you said it. Yes, we're in awe, the way you were describing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I want to go back to this aspect of fear. And I think I'd love to hear your thoughts around when we coach from a place of fear, how might that show up in a session, do you think? What are some of the things that we should pay attention to as coaches so we don't let fear be at the center of our coaching?
Sure. Wanting to get a result, setting targets. I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, but what you do is you increase the likelihood of failure and fear of failure, as opposed to come and sit with me and let's see what evolves, emerges. How would you imagine that would be as coaches if you just said, let's just sit? But I've got this issue, but can we just sit and wait? Or it's a bit like back to Nancy Klein, when we're just sitting and waiting while the person does what they need to do. So I wasn't trying to say Nancy Klein was wrong. I was just saying, yes, you could go round and round in circles and you could sit and wait and nothing would happen, apparently. I guess it's the quality of your presence as you sit. So a good Nancy Klein practitioner would just sit and wait, but would wait in a very different way from a not so good Nancy Klein practitioner. Somebody who just sat in silence, their silence would be qualitatively different from somebody who was sitting in silence as a technique, because underneath they secretly wanted a result. Can you see that if I'm sitting there and I'm using the technique of silence or letting the person or time to think or whatever, and I'm still attached to wanting a result, then that technique is just a means to an end. Whereas if I'm sitting genuinely in silence and I'm saying, we don't know what's going to evolve, that is a very different way of being together without expecting a result.
Yes, I guess the emphasis is on that word being. It's something that is just there. It's not something we're trying to make happen or do. It's just a weighing of connecting with the other person in our being together. Another thing, though, because I mean, maybe you do this sitting down with your clients, but what I notice in some of your video interviews I've seen is that you have these pauses, but then there's something like you share what's happening for you. I guess that's what John, for example, in the first episode was talking about in this use of self. And I wonder if that is something that you find yourself doing quite often as you sit in silence, maybe with a client, and then something comes up for you. And do you share it then? Do you keep it? What do you do with it?
Depends on what I think at the moment will serve best. Usually I try and share it, and if I don't, I get curious about why I'm not. But I'm experimenting so that just on Monday, what's today? Thursday. On Monday, I'm going to have 2 3-hour sessions with people. And I've done that a couple of times. And it's a bit like really giving the space to people and not knowing what's going to emerge and going past the discomfort and having to produce and this and just saying, let's just wait and see what can emerge between us. And I've done it 2 or 3 times and it's been remarkable. And I'm wondering about the whole structure of how we do. I think coaching does do longer sessions than therapy. Therapy sessions tend to be an hour or 50 minutes. I think coaching can be longer, but I like the idea of just taking lots and lots of space. And in both cases, neither room is expecting an outcome. They're just going to explore being.
Yeah. I think it does make a huge difference. As a coach, I also have, of course, a supervisor and I also have a coach. And with one of my coaches, the one I work with now, I love her approach because for her, a session is a session and there's no time limit to it. I'm not sure how she manages it, but there's no time limit to, okay, we have 60 minutes, we have 90 minutes. We have time together. And as long as I still feel that I need something or something is still open or I'm not ready, it just takes a huge pressure off this ticking clock. There's something beautiful about this approach of just saying, we're here together now for as long as it needs. And sometimes we stay 2 hours and sometimes it's 45, 50, and then that's it. We say goodbye. Yeah, there's something about that.
There's a book that I want to mention to you. It's one of my favorite little books. It's called Finite and Infinite Games. A finite game is played for a result. So sport will be finite games, win, lose. And the purpose of a finite game is to finish the game and perhaps be a winner, but certainly get a result of some kind. An infinite game is played for the love of it. The medical profession is caught into finite games of cure, whereas healing is a lifelong process and is more of an infinite game in which disease would also be part of the whole, as a part of the bigger picture. And it's almost like the left brain is the finite game and the right brain is the infinite game. And why I said about coaching lost its way, and that was very presumptuous of me, so I do want to take it back. It was just a throwaway remark, because how can I know? But I think that sometimes coaching can be excessively left-brained. And what I'm interested in is the whole playing the infinite game. So in these 2 3 hour sessions, we're playing the infinite game, whatever that means, together. And I think we'll have a lot of fun. They really are up for it, knowing they're not saying, what will I get from it? They're not coming with a problem. They're just coming to see what will emerge. And I love the idea of an infinite game rather than a finite game. And the finite game has its place, like everything. But the infinite game, can you imagine just playing for the love of it? You coach for the love of it. And if you get results, that's wonderful. And if you don't get results, that's wonderful. And the whole world doesn't think like that, even to suggest that, oh my goodness, he's paying all this money, you must get a result. And it's not working. It's not working and behind all that, getting a result will be fear of failure. We can't really fail in these 2 3 hour sessions, whatever happens. And if we feel bored or fed up with each other or whatever, we'll talk about that and enjoy that together and how we express it.
I love that. These are in person, Robin, I imagine, these sessions you just mentioned.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Sounds lovely. As you were talking, I did have this thought around, oh, but there's this monetary aspect. Not that it's limiting, we gotta earn our living somehow, but I think, yes, the fact that we are exchanging a service for a payment can place these pressures and fears. I know that sometimes I have this was like, oh, but is she getting good value for her
Her
money?
money's worth.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially if the client is coming from an aspect of I expect results. I expect to achieve some kind of an outcome or whatever it is.
Can we just dismantle that? You come to me and you want an outcome. And I notice use of self. I notice that I'm feeling quite a lot of pressure when you say that. And I wonder if that's how you feel. And the person will say, of course I do. And I'm under, I've got to produce. And then I'll say, and what will happen if you don't? I could get the sack. Yes, that's a possibility. You could get the sack even if you produced. And if you're being driven by a fear of failure, that paradoxically makes you more likely to fail because that fear will stop your creativity. And so we'd really look at the fear behind that need to produce together. And what I want for people to be able to do is to go to work without fear or with as little fear as possible.
I can imagine just how much coaching the nature, I guess, the feel of coaching would change if we could take fears out, because I do think that we hold a lot of fears in our profession. Oh, fear of whether it's failure, of getting it wrong, fear of what if they complain, what if I do something and they don't like it, or I do harm, or what if I share something and it's my stuff, but it's always our stuff. There's so many of these objections and fears in the work we do. And I'm sitting now here and wondering, so how would that look like if we dismantled those I guess what I'm thinking is we have so much work to do on ourselves, Robin, as coaches first, before we can start and help our clients dismantle those stories. We got to dismantle our own stories.
Yes, absolutely. And Baron Katie has a very good saying, if you want to know the truth, get an enemy. And why I like that so much is that what she's saying is that an enemy dismantles your story, while your friends collude with your stories. So the people who make you uncomfortable are potentially your great teachers because they're not reinforcing your stories.
Yeah, they're really good at holding mirrors, aren't they?
Yes.
Sometimes I wonder if we also, as coaches, therapists, supervisors, we get the clients, we need to do some of our own healing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes.
I think that the journey of healing is mutual. It's not just for the client, it's also for us as coaches.
Totally.
Is that your experience in supervision as well?
It's my experience of any helper, being in any helping role. In fact, there's a guy, a psychoanalyst called Harold Searles, who says that patients come to heal their therapist. So he was very adamant that that's what they did. And we're all in this together. And in the end, that boundary, it's really interesting. Why I said about coaching, and I'm embarrassed, but I did say it, losing its way, is that I think what I find with a lot of coaches, there's particular rules of how to do it. Like you mustn't interrupt and you follow the client and so on. Another of my sayings that I really like is that obedience keeps the rules, love knows when to break them. And it's just, yes, the rules are useful, but unless you are ready to break them for good reason, you will be rule bound. And what's happening is the world is getting more and more rule bound, which of course is another way of making the world more fearful, because you're much more likely to break a rule or the consequences. I know that people are being hauled up in front of like the BACP and UKCP. It's a tribunal where there's so much fear around. If a client complains, it's like terror struck in everybody's heart. And I don't want to sit back and just let all this fear dominate our professions. I've been very lucky. I've started at a time when the idea of a complaint and suing was just non-existent. And now the modern culture is so fear-driven, and I'm sad about that.
Yes, because it takes away from our humanity. It sounds maybe extreme, but I think that's how it feels to me. It takes away from our humanness. And I think the reason why I wanted to have this series around coaching beyond tools is because I was feeling that we're becoming too focused on it's just too mechanistic to the tools
Yes.
and the methods, and they have their place, yes. And what about our humanness though? What about just being one human with another human being and truly connecting? And that's what I was starting to miss in this wonderful profession. I think we can do so many amazing things as people trust us and it's just such a huge honor. And yes, sometimes it feels we're wasting some amazing opportunities by just getting bogged down by all those rules and fears. Yes.
Yes.
Sadly, we probably have to wind this down and bring it to a close, Robin. First of all, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I know I will want to go back and listen to it and reflect much more. For our listeners, if they wish to connect with you, find out more about your work, what would be the best way to do so?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm not very good at selling and promoting and whatever. I think we teach supervision through the Centre for Supervision and Team Development, which is www.cstd, C S for sugar, TD, London, www.cstdlondon.co.uk. And that's our centre. And I think it probably has my email address on there.
Fantastic. Are you also on LinkedIn, Robin? Could people reach out to you through LinkedIn or not as much? Yeah.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn and I've never posted anything, but people do reach me through it. Yes.
Fantastic. Any final words, Robin? Anything you'd like to leave our listeners with as we officially close this episode and the podcast series?
Yes. What about your series? You should have the final word on your series.
That's funny. I hope by the time they listen to this one, they've enjoyed it and it's given people just the curiosity to reflect more and maybe shift something. I think that's what I'm hoping for. Thank you so much, Robin. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. And thank you very much for asking me. And yeah, I think you're doing a good job. And as I say, why am I doing it? So don't get impressed with length of time and books and stuff like that. It's things coming from the heart. That's all that matters. If you come from the heart, you're an expert. If you come from the mind, you're useless. That's a bit sweeping.
You're destroying the whole evidence-based research.
Yes, totally. Laughed is a good way to end anyway.
It is. Yeah, it is. Thanks, Robin. Big hug.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and live events featuring the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.